AI search is forcing marketers to rethink a basic assumption. What happens when people stop choosing from 10 blue links and start getting 2 or 3 recommendations from an AI? Today, we're talking with Malte Landwehr, CPO and CMO at Peak AI. Malte has spent more than 2 decades working across SEO, product, and marketing, including running SEO at enormous scale for one of Europe's largest comparison shopping platforms. Now, he's focused on a very different problem: figuring out how brands get discovered, understood, and recommended by AI systems. Malte talks about why brands may need to describe themselves far more consistently across their websites, LinkedIn profiles, review platforms, product feeds, and the rest of their digital footprint. We get into fan-out queries and what they can reveal about the language AI systems are actually looking for, why backlinks and link graphs may still matter even in an LLM-driven world, and where structured data, Markdown, and llms.txt fit or don't fit into the picture. He also makes a point I think a lot of marketing teams need to hear. The biggest opportunity isn't always the thing you should do first. In a world where AI platforms, partnerships, and retrieval systems can change quickly, the companies that win may be the ones that can ship something small, prove it works, and then move just as quickly when the underlying system changes. This conversation was great because it gets past a lot of the speculation around AI search and into the decisions marketers actually have to make right now. What should you change? What should you measure? And which new tactics are mostly noise? I think you're really going to enjoy this one. The Page 2 podcast is brought to you by Moving Traffic Media, the digital marketing agency Joe and I founded, specializing in SEO, answer engine optimization, and performance media. Learn more at movingtrafficmedia.com. All right, here we go. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Page 2 podcast. I'm your host, John Clark, and today I'm joined by Moving Traffic Media SEO Director Constance Chen. Today we're joined by Malte Landwehr, CPO and CMO at Peak AI, where he works at the intersection of product, marketing, AI search visibility. I'm really excited to dig into his 20 plus years of experience. Malte, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I have to admit, we've never met, but I had a lot of fun doing research for this episode. Your experience is very fun to dig into, but maybe for listeners who are meeting you for the first time, what did you learn at your roles at Search Metrics, doing comparison shopping before your role at Peak that sort of prepared you for, I don't know, maybe managing like 2 C-level roles, right? That seems like a lot of work.
It is. I think at Search Metrics, I learned all the aspects of running an SEO software company, from building the product to running it, maintaining it, winning clients, keeping clients, making tough decisions about pricing, what data is available, how to get it, dealing with search engines that try to block your crawlers, keeping data quality up while also having a margin that works for the business, to how to design the contracts and offers that you send out. I also did projects together with HR, with finance. I worked with every single team at Search Metrics. I always presented my role as, on paper, I was leading the product marketing team. And yes, that team existed and they did the product marketing part. But usually the founder was putting out the number 1 fire and he gave me the number 2 fire to put out. So I really did everything. I once flew to San Francisco for a month with 2 days notice period to fill in for a coworker there. I've really done every aspect of the business. So I've seen it all at Search Metrics. And then at Idealo, I learned how to run really effective enterprise SEO at scale. International listeners probably are not aware, but it's the largest price comparison in Europe. And SEO-wise, probably actually, if we exclude travel, the largest one in the world. We literally did SEO for millions of landing pages with something like 130 million pages in total. We had the inventory from Amazon and eBay and a couple other large merchants to play with. And everything had to be automated and at scale. And I had 8 developers just for the backend logic of that. And it taught me a lot about how to do things, how to measure things, how to plan and prioritize SEO, and also what it's like if the CFO calls you in the morning, if there was a 10% traffic drop yesterday, which means significantly less revenue if a business is very much dependent on SEO traffic, which is the case for most price comparison websites and e-commerce aggregators.
And I'm so curious to hear about your background in Idealo. You mentioned that you worked with so many different enterprise companies. I'd be curious to know what kind of consumer behavior you were used to seeing, but also how How has that changed since nowadays AI recommends maybe one or two options instead of letting users compare products themselves? How do you think shopping behavior has changed?
Yeah, I wish I knew how it changed. I only have anecdotal observations and theories. I believe for actually all price comparison websites have this existential fear, like what is happening if people just do it in ChatGPT, right? Because when Google started with their the shopping ads on top, like at the beginning they were called product listing ads. Now it's Google Shopping. That already changed a lot for comparison websites in the e-commerce space. And of course, there's a high likelihood that with ChatGPT and other LLMs actually guiding me through the whole decision journey before I buy something. And if I want to, also through the buying step, I believe there's a big expectation that this will further change user behavior. I have not seen anybody actually being able to measure that. In B2B software, there are lots of studies, but for consumer purchase behavior, there's actually no study that I'm aware of that really shows how it's different, apart from the fact that people now ask LLMs about shopping questions. There's a lot of data out there from eMarketer, from BCG, from Adobe. There are a couple of studies that show the really huge impact that AI has on these journeys, but not what the actual change in behavior is, apart from asking ChatGPT.
I was listening to the Unscripted SEO podcast episode you just did with Jeremy Rivera, and he may have sent me a follow-up question for you that we'll get to later in the episode. But you guys were talking about something that was super interesting, which is publishers creating Markdown files and then inserting different, I guess, a Markdown version of a display ad, right? Sort of in that Markdown content. And if you sort of think about maybe verticals or types of sites that's been so impacted both by sort of zero click, but maybe even the LLM usage expansion, I don't know, comparison sites might fall into that bucket, right? Have you seen anything on the comparison shopping side where they're using Markdown files to, I don't know, figure out ways to get more information there or to somehow influence models in some way?
So I have not observed it in the wild. Before I left the space of comparison shopping, the last big test that I recommended the team to run after I leave was to add content if the crawler is from an LLM. For example, there's a chart with the price history for every product across tens of thousands of online shops. This is very valuable information, right, for a human.
Mm-hmm.
But if an AI crawler looks at it, of course, if it's deep research and a reasoning model, it might actually render the chart, analyze it. But if somebody asks ChatGPT a question and wants an answer 3 seconds later, the ChatGPT crawler is not going to render the website, analyze the chart, right? It's going to look for text snippets it can cite. So it could make total sense to say, yesterday, the price of AirPods Pro dropped from $199 to $189. This is the second biggest price drop we have observed over the last 30 days. Like a lot of content that probably a human would not want to reach because a chart with price and date and then a line is so much easier to consume. Or specifically in price comparison, you often have a table with like a lot of offers. And again, as a human, you look at the price for the biggest offer, then you visually look for the shop that you actually recognize that has high reputation and see what is their price. And then you make a decision like, do I go with the shop that I trust to pay 10 euros more or do I go for the cheaper one, maybe save some money? And also this could be expressed as a text. So this is what I would do if I was still working in the space to see how LLMs react to that. And especially for comparison shopping services, there's actually also the reverse thing going on where they are considering to block the LLMs so that they don't get all the pricing information from them, because there's this belief that consumers might learn on ChatGPT, I actually don't get the cheapest price. I have to go to a price comparison website. But personally, I do not believe in that because people will just assume ChatGPT gives them the cheapest price and they don't care that there's a cheaper price. That is something I've seen a lot with consumers. And there's also some data from Google that has been published in recent years where people nowadays are searching much less often for the cheapest and are searching much more often for the best or the best for them or the best personalized product. So I think the idea that I block ChatGPT and then people go to my website to compare prices is just not there for the vast majority of consumers.
It's so interesting that people are trying to do that in such a different way. I know with search, traditionally, people go into search results and they look through different links to kind of, do that comparison themselves. And now that AI does give you those recommendations for the best, how do you think this changes how we should be marketing to people and specifically in these AI platforms?
I think every brand has to be differentiated in order to stand out. And of course, there's one brand in every market that can go for price, but then I really have to be the cheapest. And it's not enough to be somewhat cheap. That's not differentiated enough. That might bring me on Google being one of 10 blue links, but it will not lead to me on ChatGPT being one of 2 or 3 recommended products. So I believe differentiation and then also clearly communicating this differentiation. That is what I would recommend every marketing team that is responsible for marketing a product or service to do. And that also involves having marketing claims that an LLM can understand. I can say something like, we welcome you to we welcome you with an open heart to our restaurant. I can say that. And then maybe in the background, there's a picture of like an old woman sitting on one table. And then there's a child playing in the background of another table. And as a human, I'm like, this is a like warm-hearted, family-friendly restaurant. But an LLM, again, the deep research LLM with lots of reasoning will also understand it. But for the quick search, the LLM will not understand it. So if I care about being visible in AI surfaces, and nowadays that even includes Google Maps with this chat with Maps feature or Ask Maps feature. Mm-hmm. So I need to make sure to actually express, for example, very explicitly, come to Malte's Diner, the family-friendly restaurant in Florida or wherever. And I think this will be a bit of a change for some marketing teams who like to just have the fluffy, flowery claim, which will not go down well with LLMs. And I also need to make sure to always have this. So I have this example that I've given it many times. So whoever has heard something from me before will now be bored, but I still want to do it. Sometimes you meet people who say on their website, they are an SEO agency for lawyers. And then on the founder's LinkedIn, it says digital visibility in the jurisdictional industry. And on the footer of their press releases, they describe themselves as a search visibility service for law offices. And as a human, yes, this is all roughly the same. But when LLMs do their web search, their grounding process, they are looking for consistent information. They want consensus from multiple sources. That is what they trust. So I should also absolutely describe myself the same way in all the places where I have control over it, and in as many places as possible where I can describe it a little bit. This is not an issue for Mercedes or Coca-Cola or McDonald's, but it is a real challenge for many, many small brands or for medium-sized companies where marketing is like a rather small function because they mainly sell to 20 big vendors who just all know them. And it's especially a big thing for one-person brands. And for a one-person brand, just describing themselves consistently online can actually overnight change how LLMs talk about them, changing the answer from, I'm not sure who this is, maybe this doctor from Tampa, or do you mean this third league soccer player from Poland, like not sure, or to very explicitly saying, this is a freelancer doing SEO work for lawyers. So that's like my biggest advice for marketing teams, consistency.
Maybe we can dig into that idea of trust sort of within an LLM. And I don't know, I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, what is an LLM's responsibility when they return a truncated result, right? So maybe someone's asking for opinions and the LLM only decides to share 2 or 3. Like, do you think they have a responsibility to give more sense of why they're choosing those 3, right? Because we know these models can be influenced outside of real facts. So I'm super interested in this idea around building that trust. There's certainly above board ways to do that, and also what you might call, black hat sort of ways to do that.
Yeah, I think as a consumer, 99% of the time, I really don't care when I run my prompts. But then 1% of the time I do care. And it would be amazing to see exactly all the reasoning traces and see every step of the way. But I also understand why LLMs are not doing it. It just makes it so easy for competitors to completely reverse engineer how they work. If you look at nowadays, these reasoning traces in the LLM, they are basically fake. They are already summaries. But there were LLMs at some point, like around GPT-4 times, that would actually give you the whole reasoning traces, especially some of the open source LLMs. And you could see that it's sometimes completely unhinged. Like it imagines some side condition that really didn't matter and then goes deeper and deeper and deeper into it and like gets completely off track from the actual task. And then of course, whatever is the final answer might also be heavily influenced by the wrong train of thought. And so, yeah, it would be nice to see it, but I think because LLMs are so unpredictable, we will never have this perfect explainability for every single answer. This is a very common problem in machine learning that usually the output you get is not explainable. And even with very simple machine learning, there are so many examples where machine learning can go completely wrong. Like there's this example of a very early image recognition algorithm that was supposed to differentiate between real planes parked at an airport and paper-made planes, like for military reasons, because sometimes you put up fake planes. And it was trained, it worked very well. And after they put it in production, they realized that they accidentally trained it to differentiate between good and bad weather, because they took the photos of the pictures of the real plane when there was good weather and the pictures of the fake planes in bad weather. And since all of their pictures were taken that way, in every test, the system worked well. And this was decades ago. And any modern LLM is so much more complex than that. The explainability is just not there.
That's super interesting. Maybe I'll get to Jeremy's question here. So Google uses PageRank to infer authority from, sort of the link graph. You guys talked a little bit about that. Do you sort of see any sort of evidence that links or maybe the relationships represented by them play a comparable role in AI retrieval and sort of that citation process? Or is it maybe just SEOs or myself sort of projecting that old model onto sort of this new system?
So indirectly, definitely, because links help you to rank in the underlying search system, right? So to become a candidate document for a citation, that absolutely helps. And then if we look at ChatGPT deep research, my colleague David was actually able to reverse engineer parts of the process. Or it's more like deep research is that showing it to you in the data between your browser and the server. And deep research is following links, like internal links, and is considering these links also in picking a source. So it might search for something, find one page on your website, and then click on a link and then end up citing a document that wasn't even in the first search result because it clicked through that on your website. So that is happening for deep research. We cannot assume that this is happening when I type a question to ChatGPT and want an answer after 3 seconds. Actually, I would bet money that this is not happening because simply it takes too much time. It's one more step. It's very, very unlikely to happen. And then the second thing about links is I believe a backlink graph is probably the best thing you can get to understand the reputation of a website on the internet in a data-driven manner. So I believe that all the LLMs will have to build their own link graph of the internet. Otherwise, there are certain things they cannot do. So one thing that we recently observed was the change from GPT 5.5 to 5.6 is there are now much more fan-out queries that contain a site search, like cite peak.ai pricing, for example, to find out the pricing of peak AI. And the domains in these site searches are LLM generated. How do I know? Because sometimes there are domains that do not exist, especially brands that are not super well known and have a common word as the name, something like hero or lightning. And when they have, for example, the domain, getlightning.com, and this is now a fictional example. Sometimes ChatGPT will search on a site search on lightning.ai, even though that is a park domain. And actually, one of my team members, Metahan, he already registered like 10 expired domains we found this way because ChatGPT is very, very regularly mentioning them in the site searches of the fan outs, but the domain was just free. It had been free for a couple of days. I guess we accidentally discovered a novel way to identify expired domains that are relevant. So if any people are here in the domain space looking at fan out queries can be an interesting source for expired domains. And like the fact that these are websites that don't exist makes it incredibly likely that an LLM is like a very small LLM is generating these fan out queries. And the fact that they are made up also tells me ChatGPT does not have a link graph of the whole internet, because it would be very easy to differentiate between a live domain that constantly receives new backlinks every week versus an expired domain that has probably not received new backlinks in years, or a parked domain that should also not regularly receive new backlinks. So I believe this is actually one of the advantages that Google has, that they have this index already. And there are rumors that OpenAI is right now building their own index, and we also see evidence that that is actually true. And then they could also build a link graph. There was also a news story recently that that Meta is now building their own search engine, which would require their own web index. And I checked a couple hundred of our customers to see how much their websites are being visited by the Meta crawlers. And it increased a lot in recent weeks. So it is actually possible that they are scraping the web to build their own web index and then also build their own link graph of the internet.
That's so interesting. I think it really corroborates a lot of what people believe in the industry about, getting more backlinks, but also brand mentions from really reputable sources. So I guess my question here is, if you were working with a very, I think, a company that maybe has a very limited budget, and they were asking whether or not they should go after more brand mentions versus maybe the other route would be to focus more on creating more accurate and more clean representations of what their company is, cleaning that up. Which route would you encourage them to prioritize first?
It depends how much freedom the person who I'm talking to actually has and what their expectations are. In a perfect world, I would start with making sure LLMs can understand my website, they can understand my content, there is no content hidden behind JavaScript, I describe my brand consistently, there's no press release somewhere that has still my old pricing. Every feature that I ever renamed, I also changed in all the old blog articles. Basically, every information is up to date and LLMs can receive that. And then in a second step, making sure also on everywhere where I have my digital footprint on the internet, my Google Maps entry, my Yelp entry, my G2 entry, my founder's LinkedIn profile, everything is up to date and the same. And then I work on growing my visibility. The reality is, of course, their expectations from leadership teams, and they want to see AI search as a growth channel. So I would probably recommend to start with whatever is a low-hanging fruit for them. So meaning there is potential to improve and they have the right lever to do it. And there are companies that have money and then they can just buy an advertorial, for example. These actually still influence LLM visibility. Or there are companies that have a big blog and the person I'm talking to has influence over the editorial calendar, then publishing your own content is probably the best thing to do. There are also companies that tend to be very, I would say, aggressive in their marketing tactics and don't have a big budget. And then I would say write comparison articles versus your competitors. And this is usually when I give advice to head of SEOs, always my advice. Start with something where you have very quickly an impact so that your internal stakeholders know they can rely on you. And that's actually much more important than on day one finding the biggest lever, because you need to become effective first within an organization, right? And in most companies, it's not about how smart you are, that you have the best idea, or that you know everything about SEO. It's about getting things done. And that often requires the help of other teams. This was already the case in SEO. And now with AI search, it's probably 10 times as true as before. Because if you look at the top sources for your prompts and you see TikTok is the number 3 source, what is the average SEO person going to do? Are they going to run a TikTok channel for their brand? Probably not. And probably they don't, like, I'm a former SEO, so I'm not trying to diss SEOs, but I think there's a very small overlap between very good SEOs and very good people very skilled at running TikTok channels. There are some people that can do both, like Jeremy, whom we mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is true for many other things. Like, you do not want to do your SEO team to take over corporate communications or influencer marketing or running your own YouTube channel. But with AI search, they are often the team that is the best at understanding what is needed to influence the LLMs, but then they have to kind of give that as an input to other teams. And in order to do that, you need to start with something quick that actually works, brings the result, then everybody can celebrate, and then you have buy-in and can do more things. Don't start with the thing that has the most impact, because most of the time that is the thing that needs 10 approvals, a lot of questions. You need a budget. You need other teams to do something for you. You maybe need a company level OKR to actually get it implemented. That's why I try not to give this blatant advice of always do this one thing because it has the biggest impact. Look at something you can actually do, something small, ship it, and then iterate from there.
I had a quick follow-up question on sort of the link graph, and I don't know, maybe even Meta and ChatGPT sort of building their own search engines. The PageRank model is such a good one. And I think you've mentioned this before, where you can sort of apply it to almost anything. But could you see in this future of search engines, one of the primary components of that shifting from anchor text to something different? Like maybe it's a fact-based system or something like that, where the facts are consistently represented and therefore trust is higher. Does that make sense? Like, could you see that the link graph still being there, but the KPI that sort of drives the value being different?
I think for now we will need some form of link graph because it solves the problem of popularity, right? And for example, the fact thing, and this is something that Google is very likely already doing, where they extract knowledge triple from a document and compare them to knowledge triples from other, like two entities and the relation between them, or an entity, an attribute, and the value for that attribute. And then compare them to others. This is actually how they started their knowledge graph, very likely. And you can already judge documents on how much does this document agree with everything else is on the internet. But the problem is, I can start a new website today, maltesopinions.com. And I can create 100 articles that agree with Wikipedia and The Guardian, etc., etc. And then my 101st article, I write something crazy. Should an LLM interfere that because I published 100 articles that agree with the consensus, that I can be trusted on that article where I write something crazy? Because every spammer can do this. And actually, thanks to LLMs, everybody can start 10 of these websites every single day for very little cost. And that is the beauty of PageRank, where especially if you have some level of domains where you know these can be really, really trusted, then it's a very good system to also layer over the popularity. The theory here being, of course, that a domain that cannot be trusted will not get a lot of backlinks. And I don't think there's a good or equivalent system that can really replace it. I think there are, of course, other systems that measure other things, like how much does this document or this whole website agree with the consensus? How are other websites talking about this brand, like with positive or negative sentiment? All of these make sense. But I think if you use them to replace the PageRank completely or the link graph completely, you will end up with situations where you don't know what is the actual domain for a very, very unknown new brand.
I wanted to pause here to provide a quick word about the team behind this show. The Page 2 podcast is produced by Moving Traffic Media. That's our agency. Moving Traffic Media is a digital marketing agency that specializes in SEO, generative engine optimization, and performance media. In plain English, we help brands show up in traditional search and in AI answers when people ask ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, or Google about them. And we back that up with everything around it, from paid media and social to web development built for how AI agents actually browse. Joe DeVita and I founded Moving Traffic Media, and we're headquartered in New York with a second office in Miami. So if your brand isn't showing up in AI answers the way it should, that's what we do every day. You can find us at movingtrafficmedia.com. Okay, let's get back to the show. So Malte, earlier you mentioned that going from GPT 5.5 to 5.6, you're seeing a lot more fan-out queries that contain a cite command search. I was curious how you think about keyword research in the age of fan-outs, right? Especially given some of the changes and how, they're appending words to queries or to these fan outs. They're looking for different things like cite commands. So they're trying to get to some sort of trust signal. Maybe how do you guys think about that at Peak, or how do you advise other SEOs around utilizing that data for keyword research purposes?
Yeah, I think if you care about visibility in LLMs, you should absolutely look at fan-out queries for your prompts. And I would then pay special attention, as you said, to the terms that are being added to the fan-out query that were not part of the original prompt. So one example is I recently had a test prompt where I was looking for a cozy, oversized hoodie. That's what I was asking for. And to many of the fan-out queries, it added the terms premium cotton and structured. But these were not words in my original prompt. So if I was a manufacturer of cozy, oversized hoodies, I would check, can I actually claim that this is premium cotton? Can I claim that this is structured? And then I should absolutely have this text on my product page and in my product feeds, because this is clearly something the LLMs are looking for. Another example is with these site searches. If my own domain is there, for example, peak.ai, and then there's a the appended term is pricing. I know that the LLMs are looking for pricing on my website. So I should go to Google, to Bing, to whatever search engine I deem relevant and look at the results for site, Peak AI, pricing. And I should make sure, number one, that the first result answers the question perfectly. And number two, I should also check result number 2, 3, 4, 5 and make sure they don't have different or outdated information to make sure the LLMs can find this consensus. And if there are no results, then I know there's content I should create, right? Because LLMs are looking for this content on my website. So I should make very, very sure to supply it, even if it's just a Q&A where I say, we don't do this. Yeah. Let's say somebody searches for Peak AI content generation, which is something we don't do because we believe it often leads to spam if you put no guardrails around it. So we could still have a page, Peak content production, where we explain why we don't have a content production feature. So really, really look at what the LLMs are looking for about your brand. And then, of course, also look at other brands, other websites that are in there that are not your direct competitors, because those are the websites you want to be on. So in the case of Peak AI, G2 is in there, Capterra is in there. So I need a G2 profile, I need a Capterra profile, and I need to optimize it. So this is how I think about keyword research in the LLM age. And these terms that are being added, usually they change every couple of months. So it can also make sense to look at them from time to time.
And then within those, let's just use G2 and Capterra as the examples. Within those profiles, are you then looking to add those terms in those profiles as well?
I mean, usually it's then something like site g2.com Peak AI or just Peak AI pricing. Like these are then usually shorter ones. Most of the time that content is actually already there. But
Okay.
yes, if it's not there, I would add it. And I would also treat my profiles on these websites like I would treat content on my own website, meaning I should make sure that I have at least like one paragraph in there that an LLM can very easily cite. So it should be high should have a high entity density. It should be written in a declarative, absolute way. It should name concrete numbers. It should maybe even mention sources, like not saying, and for those reasons, this is the best solution. Because if I take that sentence out of context, the information is zero, right? But I need to have the exact information in there that I want to convey.
And in relation to that with content, do you think formatting has a huge impact on retrieval? I mean, and I know there's a lot of discussion around how Markdown or even just how clean HTML or schema can either help AI find the content, or do you think it just makes it easier to read for AI after retrieval?
So the easiest thing or the biggest impact that I have seen is how you write. So for example, it's very boring for a human to read, but to have a page where you say Peak AI is a software to measure and improve AI visibility. Peak AI supports Google, ChatGPT, Qwen, Peak AI supports, and then you list 50 countries. Peak AI supports these 60 languages. Like, it's very boring content, but that actually gets picked up by LLMs a lot. So how you write matters a lot. The other things are mainly theoretical. So logically, a Markdown file should have much, much, much less distraction. But there is probably a step where an LLM, the system that has the LLM, it takes the website, it transfers that into Markdown, and it just gives that to the LLM. So the actual foundational model that is making the decision, it probably gets the same input from an HTML and a Markdown file. So yes, you might save a little bit of time, a little bit of resources for the LLM, but I have yet to see proof that it has crazy big impact. Logically, it should, but depending on how it's implemented, it can also create an SEO headache, because if you suddenly have every .html document also as a .md copy, and all your links and signals are going to the HTML version, but then the LLM sometimes cites the .md version, then also users might add on the .md. And of course, you can, in theory, serve both of these files under the same URL, just by making a distinction depending on who is requesting it. But a lot of websites I'm seeing, they have this blatant .md copy, and they actually ran a big test. And in 0% of cases, over hundreds of thousands of chats, did I find an LLM citing the .md version over the HTML version. So just having that .md copy is not is not enough and is potentially bad for SEO because it's duplicate content, double the amount of pages to crawl, dilution of your internal link graph, etc., etc.
Yeah, I heard that there's been some heavy debate around Markdown, but also even files like llms.txt files. I wonder if any of those files are better utilized for maybe targeting towards like AI agents versus actually building for, AI search engines. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yes. llms.txt, in my opinion, should be used to give guidance to AI agents, like actual agents. And usually it's something like, here's our API, here's our MCP, here's how you can get an API key, here's how you get an OAuth token. Or explaining very roughly, like, we are a price comparison website. We have products and we have categories, and on product pages you find multiple prices, and under this URL you can run a search. And if you encounter this URL, it's a filtered category, and our filters on the left side of the navigation, like something like this, that's actually helping an agent to navigate your website. And then it depends. Do you want to send to the MCP, to the API? Do you want to explain how they can click around on the website? I have yet to see any example where an llm.txt actually increased visibility in an answer. It is a text document. It can rank in Google and it can be a source, but it usually is not used for simple searches. What is actually happening if you tell Claude, connect to the Peak AI MCP? There's a good likelihood that one of the searches that Claude is doing is, or actually not a search, it's just trying to fetch peak.ai/llms.txt. Like that is a realistic scenario. And that is also happening. I know because customers sent a screenshot and said like, hey, this is the first time I'm seeing llms.txt anywhere. But of course, that is a very different use case from search. That is a work intent, like doing something, getting something implemented. So I would not stuff my llms.txt with iPhone, AirPods, price comparison, cheap iPhone, cheap AirPods in hopes that will make me rank better. That is unlikely to work. But of course, I can have a couple of sentences there saying, hey, I'm a reputable price comparison website. We have 100,000 online shops in our database and 6 million products, and we update prices 50,000 times per second. You can trust us. We won a lot of awards. Yes, you can write it in there. Maybe it will help a little bit, but it's not the needle mover. Many people, I think, want the llms.txt to matter because it's so simple. Like you can do it. You feel good about yourself once it's implemented. And I know many SEOs operate on that level because they don't have the tools or experience to measure the impact of their work. But I don't know anybody who is strict about measuring and thinks that llms.txt is a lever for more visibility.
I wanted to dig into Schema a little bit specifically, and I was just curious your thoughts, or I don't know, maybe even your test results around what stages markup can actually affect. So is it discovery? Maybe it's entity resolution, right? Because you can sort of establish those relationships. Is it retrieval, extraction? Do you have you dug into that piece of schema markup at all?
Yes, and it's confusing, unfortunately, because two things are true that sound contradictory. So one thing, and we mentioned this earlier, that like whatever you give the LLM, there's a pre-processing, it's turned to Markdown that's actually then used to generate the answer. In this process, the structured data is thrown away. It's gone. The text from the structured data can still be there, right? But the structure itself is gone. And on the other hand, there are many, many cases where people added structured data and had an uplift in AI visibility or in citations or retrieval. So there must also be something positive happening. And my belief is that the following is happening. If I add structured markup to a website and I also add content, of course, I add content, right? And that is often the driver of improvements. And the second thing is structured markup is often something templated. So for example, if an online shop and the price is in the structured markup, then I need to have a price on every product page. This sounds very trivial, but I can tell you there are many websites out there that forget very important parts on some pages, like publishing a list of events, and then for two of the events, they forgot the location, for example. So it can be a bit of a forcing function for your data hygiene, data quality that also has a positive impact. And there's structured data that influences what your search results looks like in Google or Bing, especially in the e-commerce space. You have price, delivery time, availability, etc., etc. So there, it's highly, highly likely that structured data leads to a better attractiveness of how your result looks to an LLM. So it makes it more likely that it's picked when it gets a list of like 60 candidate documents and 3 of them already have the price in description. Perfect. Taking those. I cannot prove that, but this is my rational explanation how both of these things that are a little bit contradictory are true. And of course, structured data might help you rank in Google itself. And many LLMs rely on Google for at least parts of their grounding. So if you have an online shop without structured data, and I have an online shop with structured data, guaranteed at least over time, I will rank ahead of you because people are more likely to click on my result. It has the price and the availability. So I will rank on top at some point because of how the re-rankers work within Google search. And that, of course, also has indirectly then an impact on my AI visibility.
I had 2 follow-up questions there. I guess first, if there's discrepancies in the data, right? So maybe Schema, for whatever reason, isn't pulling from the page to populate the data and it's outdated and the page itself is updated. Again, assuming there's no JavaScript or anything like that. Curious your thoughts on which one you think tends to win, right? Like, is it the old one or is it maybe trust in Schema? And then the second question, which is, I don't know, maybe loosely related, is we were talking with a client the other day who's dealing with a tough sort of like JavaScript rendering issue. And they had a question, which was, what if we serve everything through Schema markup, at least for now, while we figure out some sort of like server-side solution for the rest of the site? Like, would that impact anything? And I didn't have a really great answer for that. Curious your thoughts on maybe both of those.
So for the first one, I have a good answer because somebody ran the experiment and published it. If you have data on your website in the text and then contradicting data in the schema, the data in the text wins. And if you have information not in the text at all and only in the schema, only in very, very few cases are LLMs able to answer your question with the data from the schema. So ChatGPT, if I remember correctly, in maybe 20, like even you point it to a URL and you say, what is this URL saying about this topic? Or what is the price of this product? And the price is only in the schema. I think with ChatGPT, it was something like in 20% of cases it answers. And with Claude, it was 0%. So clearly, I cannot rely on schema to convey information that is not in the text. The experiment is a couple of months old with like, I always have like, in search, stuff changes quickly, a little bit disclaimer. If somebody wants to know how it works today, test it and please then share it with me so I can seem smart when I'm on the next podcast. But like the only test that I know is a couple of months old, had very, very definitive result here. Schema without having it in the content is not enough. If we apply this logic to your second case, I would say, please figure out the server-side rendering for JavaScript.
That was my recommendation.
Maybe use some, like you could have a logic in Cloudflare where if it's a user agent from an LLM, you show them a cached version and only humans and the Google bot that can deal with JavaScript get the real website. Or if server-side is not possible, there are some hydration frameworks where at least the most important content is in the initial HTML and then JavaScript only adds on top of that. But I would always aim for fixing the JavaScript rendering problem.
I think going back to what you were saying about schema versus having actual text on the website, have you seen anything related to product feeds or even business profiles and seeing if AI, looks to those signals and over website HTML?
Yeah, so I would say over, but like it looks at both. So in e-commerce, a few months ago, the shopping in ChatGPT was actually all scraped from Google Shopping. It's all in the server-side code between your browser and the server. You find all these parameters. You can click together a URL. You land on Google Shopping, and they are the exact same products for the exact same price with the same number of reviews. And you also see it sometimes in the product URLs in ChatGPT that they still have this UTM parameter from Google Merchant Center. So, and this has shifted a little bit. In the US, it seems to be that nowadays, like 20% of products are now coming actually from direct feed integrations. Internationally, it's a little bit less, just because for most non-US websites, if they filled out the form, hey, I want to send you my feed, until today, a year later, they still haven't heard back from OpenAI. So it's mainly Walmart and Dell and these kinds of players who can send a direct feed. Etsy, Shopify, which of course has a lot of reach. So the product feed data is in that sense then what matters for the information in the ChatGPT shopping feature. However, they also do a normal grounding process in parallel, and they seem to use that to kick some products out of the listing and to re-rank the product because they are not in the same order as on Google. So what is written on the internet seems to still matter also for this. And then for the business profiles, I've recently done a lot of tests for local SEO or local GEO, AEO, however we want to call it. And ChatGPT is actually super, super local. Like in the app, if you allow it to use your exact location, it really shows you your exact location. It also uses that. Like you can walk down the street and you get different answers if you're looking for a restaurant, for example. And you can even just put geo coordinates in the prompt. And then it uses these geo coordinates. It centers the map on these geo coordinates. So you can basically simulate different locations very, very easily. And there are, again, multiple data sources. And there are some direct integrations with Yelp and with TripAdvisor. So that content for local businesses is super, super relevant for the listing on the Google Maps. And also the ratings and the number of reviews are pulled in from these platforms. And there's also some like scraping going on where it seems to be that then also Google Maps data can influence ChatGPT local or ChatGPT Maps, however we want to call it. So your business profiles can be very, very important. If we looked in the US, also stuff like BBB, Better Business Bureau, very, very often in the sources. If we look to the UK, they have Yelco UK, I guess it's like Yellow Pages, that is like super dominant. And then of course, like Yelp for like all kinds of businesses. So yes, these things are important. And if you are a business that wants to be booked via the ChatGPT map, there is only Yelp, Resi, and OpenTable right now, which for many international players means you need to be on OpenTable because there are countries where like Resi is incredibly US centric in my perception and Yelp is just not that present in some international markets. So you are very limited in your options, and ChatGPT makes it very easy to know that it's just these three because again, in the code, there's a variable called like booking partners, and it's an array with exactly these three. So it's kind of easy to figure out where to be if you want to be booked via the map.
I was always curious about these sort of like data relationships. You know, we've seen, I'll use Reddit as the example maybe. So Reddit and Google have a partnership. We saw massive increases in Reddit. Obviously, LLMs love that ecosystem as well. But could you foresee any risks with, let's use the Yelp partnership? Maybe you shift a lot of your focus to Yelp because it's a direct feed into ChatGPT now. Maybe you spend less time on Google My Business because of that. And then that relationship might end, right? Do you foresee any of these sorts of risks where maybe companies are over shifting toward maybe the newest data relationship and not sort of being mindful of all the other ecosystems?
I definitely see the risk. I still think shifting focus on the newest partnership is not a bad idea because often new marketing channels yield very, very good results. Mm-hmm. I think the important part is you need to be agile and you need to be able to very, very quickly commit. Like not commit now to do something in 6 months, right? But there's an official Yelp partnership. Let's do something now. By the way, we saw the Yelp data feed integration in the code before the press release went out. And I actually wanted to break that news then at a webinar, and then they sent the press release earlier. It was one of my saddest days in preparing for a webinar. And if you can shift quickly, if you are agile, absolutely do it. I believe it's worth it because so many companies will be slow. But you also need to be the kind of company that can say, if this partnership ends in a few months, I have no idea. I don't think it will. But if that happened, you need to have a company culture where you say, okay, we made a decision to focus. It was the right decision. Circumstances changed. We stopped doing this. It was nobody's mistake. There's no blame. We will find a new role for everyone. But we make this decision now to stop investing in Yelp and not let every project run for another 6 months, not keep all the headcounts on our Yelp project just because we committed to it. And companies that have this culture that can very quickly commit, but also quickly decommit and then focus on something else, I think they will strive in this world where things happen very, very quickly. But if you are a very slow moving company, if you're the kind of company that can never kill a project, that you always continue everything that you ever started, then I would not jump on every new trend. Then I would work on company culture and OKRs or like some instrument to get away from this mindset, because I believe agility also in leadership and in the company, just accepting the change without fear and without resistance is very, very important business-wise in general, but especially for AI search, because things are changing so quickly.
One last question before we jump to rapid fire. I was curious, we've talked about llms.txt, Markdown. Could you, I don't know, do you think there's a need for the equivalent of like an ads.txt file where we basically can define for an agent maybe what feeds or what data sources are reliable sources of truth for, facts about an entity or a brand? Could you foresee something like that in the future?
I could definitely imagine it. And I mean, with structured data, you kind of have like this same as relationship. So you could actually do something like that. I believe one question is always, as a third party, do I trust what a company says about itself? Because if I have bad results on Google Maps, I'm not going to say, trust Google Maps about me. Right. So I think it's a bit of a two-sided issue. And I think the better solution is to understand what are trustable sources in general, because most likely the brands that will adopt this, here you find information about me, are also the ones that are most likely to optimize it and say, yeah, you can trust Yelp and TripAdvisor, but not Google Maps.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, couple rapid fires to close us out. True or false? Traditional keyword volume research will largely be obsolete in 2028 or by
False.
2028. False. Okay. What would you use as the volume definition? Would that be something like a prompt volume at that point, where you sort of categorize things together?
I mean, I said false, so it will be obsolete, right? So I believe keyword research still works. I don't think that all searches will shift to prompts. I believe there will still be people searching traditionally on Google, either because they are used to it, because they're maybe even older than me and can't change their behavior anymore, or because they believe AI is stealing their drinking water and they don't want to use it. And that will still make traditional search volume usable and interesting to a certain degree. It will be less important than today, though, but I still believe it will be important to do traditional keyword research, look at traditional search volume.
Here's another quick one I have for you. Which AI optimization tactic do you think wastes the most time and money?
Long-term listicles that you publish on your own website. Right now, in the past, they worked amazing. Right now, they still seem to work on many LLMs, but they are the first insights that they might not work anymore and that you are just helping your competition. And I think there are people who will continue doing them for 2 years and it will not have any impact anymore.
Amazing. All right, last one. Who should we interview next? Do you have anyone that you sort of look to for insights and information? Medahan was obviously a great guest. We'd love to have him back on, but anyone else that you could recommend?
Ethan Smith is always very insightful. Lily Ray has sort of good examples she can share.
Yes, definitely.
I think Glenn Gabe has an amazing overview over the industry and what's happening. Those would be my 3 picks.
Okay, amazing. Malte, this has been so much fun. Thanks for getting in the weeds here with us. For those listening, let them know where they can find you online.
LinkedIn is the best place to find.
Okay, perfect. And any conferences coming up that you'll be speaking at, or?
Yes, a lot. But I don't have all of them in my mind. I will have a couple of events in London, a few in Germany, one in Paris, and I'm going to New York and San Francisco end of the year to speak at the GEO conference.
Okay, amazing. Well, hopefully we'll have the chance to meet in person at least one of those. Constance is based out in San Francisco, so maybe you guys can run into each other. Well, thanks again for joining us on the Page 2 podcast. And if you enjoyed the show, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.